data today, but I do feel it's important to always touch on why this transparency matters. It has a lot to do with the fundamental lack of trust that exists in our country toward what we do, right? And that's why we focus on transparency, CRS reports, cameras in the Supreme Court, and many other actions. People don't feel like they know why we're making our decisions, what we're basing our decisions on. We don't have a chance to win back their trust. The real cost of corruption is the loss of the public's trust. And it's hard to make those tough decisions without that trust. You know, I'm from Illinois, and you know things are getting bad with corruption when you hear jokes from guys from New Jersey and Louisiana. It's tough. I'm glad to see my co-chair, Darrell Issa, here today. But to begin with, I want to appreciate the panelists being here, for all of you participating. I know there's been momentum toward a single electronic financial reporting standard that allows users to easily search through documents for important data. Searchable financial data allows investors to make better decisions, allows markets to more quickly digest information, and lets smaller public companies reach a much broader range of investors. This sounds like a relatively simple task in the 21st century. Welcome to Washington, D.C. Information collected from publicly traded companies, banks, and other financial institutions by most regulators are still treated as static documents, either posted online as a PDF or in another unsearchable format. PDFs are nice because they look the same on your computer screen as they do printed out, but they lock valuable data away from the user, making large-scale data analysis nearly impossible. It's really easy to turn structured data into a PDF, but it's quite hard to do the opposite. We've seen some promise at the SEC, which now requires information filed and submitted by publicly traded companies to be searchable. However, progress has stalled, which is why Congressman Issa and I have consistently pushed the SEC to continue to improve the quality of its data. But we shouldn't stop with only requiring the SEC to adopt open searchable data. All financial regulators should be required to coordinate with one another to adopt a single data standard that allows information collected by the agencies to be searchable format and to enable searchability across agencies. That's exactly what the Financial Transparency Act today, one of the issues we're going to be talking about. I know that my co-chairman is busy with other things, so I'd be glad to bring him on here at this point. And again, thank you for being here, and thank our panelists.
Mike, thanks for being such a good partner. You know, I don't want to feel old, but I remember when he was a freshman, and I was so impressed that he didn't care which side of the issue came in on. He looked at it very openly, and that's when we became friends. Summarizing, if you will, Congressman Quigley just said, we have been talking transparency for a long time. But when we want to talk open government, and we want to talk about real information, we have to start looking at what's happened in just the last decade or so. A decade or so ago, we were arguing over XBRL because, quote, that was at least going to make electronic filing put things readable. Now we're looking at the difference between one company that can take the moment a 10K comes out and get a matter of minutes advantage of getting to market with a determination of what's going to happen over somebody who just simply has less resources. And we need to equalize that. It is only a matter of months ago that people figured out that different pathways for fiber optics in New York City could create a disparity that hedge funds could take advantage of and, for a time, legally cheat people out of a buy-sell relationship that they were entitled to. And for people of my age, it is only a few years ago that people were arbitraging the differences, the disparities between money exchanges or even the buy-sell of stocks. We need to get to precision that only comes with all information being available and available equally to the large and the small. There will always be an advantage of having more money to do more analysis, to own the best software. But we need need to narrow that as much as we can in an era in which two loops of light can in fact be different enough for somebody to make money off of that disparity. And that's the environment in which this panel has to talk about financial transparency. Now, Mike and I are also concerned about finding fraud in the market, finding the things that will help us make a market not have another Bernie Madoff. I mean, we're interested in a lot of the open government dynamic that goes back and forth so that someone who sees a problem can report it and it can be heard and acted on. We're not going to get that as long as the SEC is only opening an investigation at some threshold versus being open for every disparity to be analyzed and understood in real time. You catch little problems, there are no big Bernie Madoff problems. You catch little problems, there are no Enrons. We haven't caught them in the past, and the only way we catch them in the future is with true open government. And this bill is not the only bill necessary to create that open dialogue of information between investors and between the public and private sector. But Mike, it's a good start. And so that's what the panel's on today. And I want to thank you, Hudson. I want to thank you for being here, taking notes. I'm always impressed.
I have to say, making data interesting or, in a political sense, sexy is a pretty tough sell. And so I can't tell you how much I appreciate Chairman Issa and Congressman Quigley for their support for this important effort. I don't think anyone ever got reelected by focusing on the need for better data, and I really want to thank them for the unique position and the leadership that they're providing on this important issue. I have to say that it is not an exaggeration to say that data in the financial world is a total mess. In fact, I would say that the state of data in the financial world is comparable to what it was like in the 19th century in manufacturing, when every nut had its own bolt and steam engines were routinely exploding because there was no standard for how much pressure a nut and bolt assembly could hold. And it was the problems with steam engines blowing up that led to the development of the first standard in manufacturing. It was the standard for nuts and bolts. The problem with financial data is that it doesn't get enough attention in the private sector, and in part certainly because the folks responsible for data have to compete with the folks who need capital to generate revenue and profits for their firms. And developing a data standard is a tough thing to get your arms around. And the rare opportunity that using government leadership to deal with the question of data standardization, and transparency, is that it is an absolutely unique opportunity where it holds out the promise of being a win-win situation for both industry and the regulatory community. In the case of industry, standardizing data for counterparties and the representation of financial instruments in a standard that supports financial analysis holds out the opportunity for significant reductions in operating costs. In fact, when I was leading the committee to establish National Institute of Finance, one of the large investment firms was kind enough to have their operations people give us an estimate of how much could be saved by adopting the standard we were talking about. And the answer that came back was the firm expected, and this was 5 years ago, the firm expected to be able, or 6 years ago, the firm expected to be able to save 20 to 30% of operating expenses per year based on the adoption of new data standards. This, by the way, for that firm came to $200 or $300 million a year. And this firm wasn't the largest one in the industry, so you have to think through the very large firms like JP Morgan Chase, Citi, et cetera. The opportunities for cost saving are tremendous. Secondly, there's a tremendous opportunity to reduce the regulatory burden. In a world that made sense to me, I would expect that regulators, C-suite executives, chief risk officers should all be interested in seeing the same data and the same analytics. They might reach different conclusions because they have different objective functions, but it seems to me that they should want to start out with the same data and the same analytics. And basically, most regulatory reporting today is a deadweight loss. I have yet to find a firm that uses the material provided to the regulator to manage risk on the firm and manage the firm. And from my perspective, that means we have a large opportunity, a great opportunity to improve the quality of what regulators collect and at the same time reduce the regulatory burden on the industry. As I said, the third advantage is it enables a firm to improve the quality of the risk management. For the regulatory community, it means moving away from a reliance on accounting data, which is not a risk metric, which is backward-looking, which is static, and does not really provide a vehicle for understanding risk and how risk will evolve going forward as circumstances change, to a world in which they can collect granular transaction and position data in a format that allows them to do forward-looking financial analysis. And when we talk about forward-looking financial analysis, we're talking about things like income, value, liquidity, and the input for all of these variables of interest starts out with expected state contingent cash flow. And so we need a standard that in fact generates expected state contingent cash flow to be able to do this forward-looking analysis. So the industry comes away with more efficient operating expenses, lower regulatory burden, the ability to do better risk management. The regulators come away with a much better process of data collection that permits better analysis of what's going on in the firms they regulate and to do it in near time, if not real time. The key to this nirvana, if you want to call it data nirvana, is really having the adoption of the correct standards, having them universally applied. And in the case of financial analysis, the two standards that are needed are one, unique identifiers for counterparties, which is the vehicle that was created through the global LEI effort, the Legal Entity Identifier System. You need both the LEI and you have to have information about the family tree. A firm like IBM, I think, has 12 or 1,300 individual charters, so we have 12 or 1,300 LEIs. The large investment banks or financial firms have 3,000, 3,500. So you have to have the LEI, who your counterparty is in terms of contract, and you have to have the family tree information. Secondly, as I said, you have to have a standard for financial instruments that allow you to take granular transaction and position data and subject it to financial analysis. And the only vehicle for doing this really is an algorithmic formula, which is able to take all the important contract terms that determine state contingent cash flow and the algorithmic representation, which in fact, combined with the contract terms, generates the input for financial analysis. And this, by the way, is sadly the unfulfilled expectation for the OFR. Hasn't done it yet, but the Actis Financial Research Foundation is in fact building exactly what the intent of the OFR legislation was, included in the non-federal legislation. Thank you.
Great, well thanks for that. So I'm Darrell Castor, I'm the director of the Center for Data Innovation, which is a nonprofit think tank here in DC. Started about 2 years ago. It's affiliated with the Information Technology Innovation Foundation. Now our focus is really on investigating issues at the intersection of data technology and public policy. Our goal is to find the opportunities where we can use data to create economic value, to streamline government processes, or to address some other kind of societal challenge or societal issue out there. And what we see is that a lot of the areas where we're lagging are often areas that are highly regulated. Healthcare, education, and of course the financial sector. When we look at the kind of big opportunities around data, there's always the same type of process that you see. First, you want to make sure, are you collecting data? Do you have good quality data? Is the data timely? Is it accurate? Is it precise? Is it very granular? And then, are you sharing it? Are you making it widely available for all the different uses? Whether it's open data in the kind of general sense, or whether you're just creating the right kind of economic conditions so that firms can share the data so that it's a resource that can be used to its maximal utility. Do we have those right processes in place? And then finally, what are you doing to enable its use? Do you have the right kind of human capital? Do you have the right kind of technology infrastructure? What have you done to really make sure the data can actually be used and applied to get to better decisions? And so in the financial sector, we see that there's a huge opportunity here. In short, you can't have good analysis of financial markets if you don't have good data. And for the longest time, we haven't had very good data. We have, over the past few decades, recognized the need for transparency in the financial sector. What we haven't done is really move to the state that we have in other areas, where we say we have to have very timely, precise, accurate data available to the right individuals at the right time immediately. And so that's what we've seen in a lot of recent legislation, is how can we really shift the current status quo to something where this data is made widely available. And so we've been very supportive of efforts to extend open data throughout the financial sector. Some of this is just around open data requirements. Some of it really, though, is now moving into this implementation question. How do we do this well? And there's a lot of lessons that we can learn from different sectors that have addressed these same issues. For example, in healthcare, one of the primary challenges of healthcare data is how do you accurately identify patients? If you don't have unique patient identifiers, you're not able to actually treat people well. You can make mistakes. You're not able to see as data moves through the healthcare system. This is the exact same problem we have in the financial sector. Without the LEIs, without these identifiers for legal entities, you don't actually know what data is about which entity in a global sense. And so you have different types of data sets that cannot be linked together, and so you're losing the value and you're losing these opportunities. The second area is really around creating this data. And so we've seen this gradual shift into creating more electronic documents, but now of course we're really trying to move into electronic machine readable data. And so our goal, and really one of the fundamental things that we're looking at in terms of the financial sector, is how can we get all the regulators to basically eliminate all of their document-based filing and replace it with machine readable alternatives. That should be the goal. We should really be doing an assessment, doing an account, just like we did for data centers, when we had to go out there and figure out how many of them were out there, get that number, and look at that number every day and say, what are we doing to get that number down to zero? That should be the goal. That's something that we should be focusing on. I know we're going to have issues, but let me just stop there.
My name is Matt Rumsey. I work at the Sunlight Foundation. Sunlight is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that believes in the power of technology to make the government a more open, accountable, and effective institution. We work at the federal level, but we also work internationally and at the state and local level. One of the big ways we believe in doing that is through opening up more data and bringing out data that is in machine readable, open, standard formats. So sort of the Financial Transparency Act and financial transparency, regulatory transparency writ large is right up our alley and something that we're excited to help out about. So the way we work is with people like myself who do policy work and come to the Hill and push for legislation, regulation, that sort of thing. And we also have a technology team that takes government data and does cool things with it, builds tools that can be more useful to the public, to watchdogs, to whoever wants to use them. So that actually makes my job really easy because I can go to them and say, what do you want from the government that is not in good format, that costs too much money or takes up too much time, for you to do something cool with it. And then I go back and try to push for that to be released in a more open way in machine readable formats. And then sort of all of this is right near the top of that list. And I think, for us, one of the biggest reasons why financial regulatory data sort of more broadly is very important is really reflected in something that Representative Issa pointed out in his opening remarks, which is that true open government is going to help identify those Enrons and those Bernie Madoffs and the people that are really taking advantage of the system and the inefficiencies there. And if you have better open data, more data that's able to be connected and analyzed quickly, both by regulators, but also by people on the outside, by watchdogs, by journalists, by academics, and by members of Congress, you're going to solve those problems and catch those problems before they become huge sort of drags on our economy and huge scandals. And that is shouldn't just be of interest to people who work on Wall Street or people who work for financial regulators. regulators, that's of interest to anyone that, you know, has money in 401k or 403b, anybody that owns a couple shares of a stock, really anyone that wants to retire, that sort of thing. So that is sort of some of the reasons why Sunlight is really interested in pushing this forward, and why we believe in, you know, transforming this data from documents and PDFs into machine readable, structured, standardized, really usable data.
Thank you, gentlemen. And just to begin the conversation, I'll start with just the first question, and whoever wants to field it and weigh in, be very much appreciated. But just to begin with, sort of on the surface level, I guess, of moving toward structured data is LEI, or legal entity identifiers. What do you think would be the first step toward moving in that direction? How would you sum up efforts thus far to adopt the LEI, and what would some of the benefits be to, you know, in the adoption of legal entity identifiers?
Well, clearly, the LEI Foundation has done a great job of getting it off the ground. OFR provided great leadership for the creation of the LEI structure and system. And what's missing at this point is that the regulatory community doesn't require it. And I want to give you two examples of where benefits lie if the LEI were universally used. And you have to bear in mind, LEI is what we would call in the industry as a reference database. It's sort of a canonical way of describing things, in this case, counterparties. And in the financial world, in trading derivatives, clearing and settlement is automated. It was automated about 20 years ago because manual clearing and settlement became so burdensome and the volume of trade had gotten so high that the system was on the verge of collapsing. And so they came up with this automated system for clearing and settlement. But if you don't have a unique way of identifying who your counterparty is, what you wind up with is trades being kicked out of the automated clearing and settlement system and have to be resolved manually between the different firms. And that's a very expensive process. If everybody used the LEI, there would be no ambiguity of who the counterparties were, and it would speed up and reduce the cost of clearing and settlement. So that's, just one sort of simple way of describing it. Secondly, from a regulatory perspective, when Chairman Issa talked about Madoff and avoiding future Madoffs, if all the trades that were reported to the data repositories created by the Dodd-Frank legislation for swaps, if all those swaps were reported using the LEI as a descriptor of each of the two counterparties, if a question came up over Madoff, and there were analysts who raised questions about Madoff, they were just ignored by the relevant regulatory agencies. But if a question came up, you could check very quickly as to the legitimacy and the substance of the complaint being filed by simply looking at the reporting from both counterparties. And if Madoff was reporting a series of trades, and there was no counterparty using the LEI to report the same trade, we would know immediately that this was a fraudulent operation.
Yeah, I just want to jump in. I think this is one of the most important issues here. When you look at basically, especially when you look at fraud, the whole reason kind of a lot of this modern fraud works is because companies or individuals are able to operate under this kind of cloak of complexity, right? And the way around that, of course, is through data analytics, and not just humans looking at data, but automated analytics. And the only way you can do that is if you have structured data that's set up in such a way that you can do that type of analysis. And so, when we're talking about moving forward and actually kind of achieving something here, this has to be, one of the top line items for reforms. It's just striking me. You think about basically the way a lot of this was done in the past, just on kind of common identifiers. I was reading an article yesterday that they released, for 2015, the top baby names. you know, and so like when you think about kids going to school, and you know, like there's gonna be 20 kids named Liam in 5 years. But you know, this is the same thing with companies, right? Where there's basically this identification problem. And it's a fundamental problem that if you don't solve that, everything else we do with the data isn't going to be as effective because you're going to have this confidence problem. You're not going to be confident in the predictions that you can make through your analytics. And so simply by resolving this one data standard issue, we actually have a huge impact on the value and utility of everything else that comes next. And we see this a lot in these data issues where you really have to kind of get into the weeds to actually have an impact. This is one of those kind of, I think, really important issues that it's good that we actually have a full room of people who are hearing about LAI, which you know, maybe you didn't hear about it before, but it's one of those issues you have to take back and say, no, this is really important. We have to make sure we get this one right.
And let's build off that, having the LEI or another sort of agreed upon good international identifier standard is not just valuable for sort of the financial sector, it is valuable across the board, sort of to root out waste and fraud and abuse sort of in any sector. So if you have a good LEI or a good identifier, you're going to be able to track terrorist financing much easier. You're going to be able to track contractor fraud, and you're going to be able to find sort of these problems in the financial sector. And so it's not just here, it's important across the board. So I think steps like this, sort of getting on the same page, getting regulatory agencies, the whole government on the same page it's a really huge step to move forward. So.
Thank you. And I guess furthering a further example, we mentioned the Madoff fraud, and I think that it was interesting that nobody mentioned the Lehman Brothers failure, which I think was part of the inspiration for sort of the American adoption of LEI or move in that direction. And then you mentioned terrorist financing, which brings in the global aspect, and we know that the global standards were set at the G20 conference for LEI. But looking more specifically into their adoption in the United States, would you say that the United States has adopted LEI more readily, or is further along than any other country, or who would you say is the leader in LEI right now, and what can we do to move more quickly along that path?
I don't know enough really about foreign adoption to give you an informed answer. My apologies.
I saw something that earlier this year we were at about 300,000 entities, and I think that was globally that adopted. Now, some percentage of that is in the United States. One of the challenges I think the U.S. has, when you look at open data in general, we've done some rankings of countries and others have as well. One of the reasons the UK consistently ranks ahead of the United States on open data overall as a nation is because of its corporate transparency laws. And that's something that kind of goes beyond LEIs, but it's it has to be part of the conversation at the end of the day. Basically, do you know who's behind organizations, and can you have that kind of transparency to to really make these connections? So that would be part of it. I think at the end of the day, in terms of ranking, there's kind of LEI adoption, there's also a broader corporate transparency question. And so in that regard, the UK has been ahead of the United States.
I also can't speak to the international context as much, but I know that sort of a barrier to adoption in the United States has been the fact that for a long time, any entity that wants to do business with the U.S. government actually has a different standard that they're required, which is the DUNS number, that's actually written into the Federal Acquisition Regulation, which has made the government hesitant to move quickly towards any other standard, but that is looking like it's going to shift at some point in the future, near future. DoD, NASA, and Treasury, I believe, have sort of a rulemaking out to remove the specific reference to DUNS in the FAR and to try to move towards a less sort of mandated and open the system up a little bit. So that might make it a little bit more flexible and lead to faster adoption of other things.
Yeah, I think that the FAR requirement is just one of the large number of federally based identifying systems used by different agencies. And so the bureaucratic process is somewhat sluggish because it requires a large number of different agencies who have reporting systems in place that depend upon their proprietary reference databases. So it's not simple, but the benefit down the road is so great that it's worth having.
Moving more into specific examples of the adoption of structured data formats throughout the U.S. government, can any of you provide some examples of successes that we've seen in the adoption of structured data formats in our financial regulatory structure, and possibly some shortcomings or even failures to make progress in some areas that we'd like to see?
Well, I have to say that given that the financial regulatory world relies primarily on accounting data, I have to say that in one sense, the data they collect is structured according to accounting standards. Unfortunately, those data do not come in a format that are readily analyzable in a meaningful financial way. Take, for example, derivatives. One of the things that regulators like to do to understand risk is to aggregate exposures. And if you have outstanding loans or mortgages, you can do some aggregation with, I think, some meaning, because we understand what a bond or a loan or a mortgage is, et cetera, that you expand on and aggregate. The problem is in the derivatives world, when you talk about aggregation, the presumption is that there's something meaningful to aggregate, and there isn't. You know, most of the aggregation in the derivative world consists of aggregating notional values, and notional values have no meaning. So if you move away from notional values, what's the alternative? You can aggregate fair market value. The problem is when you aggregate fair market value, what you're aggregating is a value of a derivative on a date certain, under a certain set of risk conditions extant in the world on that day. And it tells you nothing about what happens to the value of that derivative on the next day. And so your question really, sadly, I can't say that there are lots of successes, but I can say there's lots of opportunity for improvement.
Okay, and then Mr. Issa actually alluded specifically to the example of the SEC in his introduction. He specifically referred to the trial program with XBRL that began a number of years ago at the Securities and Exchange Commission. Would any of you like to highlight what we can do to move more in the direction of a structured data for, say, 10Ks and 10Qs, what the resistance to that change might be, and what the benefits of that change would be, of the reliable structured data available to regulators, investors, regulated entities alike?
Yeah, so I'll jump in. I mean, when we look at what the SEC is doing, just kind of generally at data-driven innovation, there's always three components. It's the people, technology, and the data. And so you have to have, agencies that understand all three of these components and look at what they're doing in this area. On the people side of it, with SEC filings, we're generally doing pretty good in the sense that one, there's a really, there's a user base out there that wants this. The investors want this. The regulators within the SEC want it. We've seen, that there's likely a very good staff at the SEC that can implement this already in the XBRL trials. So that's not really the issue here. And on the technology side, we've also seen some really good progress with the SEC, right? They modernized the EDGAR system. They looked at how they can improve both e-filing and reporting. They have validation systems in place. So they're laying the groundwork for future work. It's really the data issue that we're most concerned about here. And the question is, can we get to better quality data? And so, we do want to see, of course, very structured data. We also see, within 10Ks, there's unstructured data, even within the structured data format where there's kind of narrative text. And you want to be able to use machine learning, sentiment analysis to actually go in there and do analytics on that as well. And I think there's opportunities to do that. And there's a lot of companies that I think are looking to basically how they can start adding that value. And when you look at the data space, you see a lot of companies that are basically innovating with algorithms. They're innovating with a new way to process data, and now they're going and seeing where can they go out and apply their solutions. And so the question is, what can we do in this, financial regulatory space to say, here's a new opportunity for all these tech companies to come and apply their skill, and here's the potential value. And so I think some of this is also a conversation that the regulators are having with the tech companies to kind of introduce the problems and challenges they have and say, what kind of solutions do you have to offer? Because the solutions sometimes are already out there, they just need to find the right problem.
And Allan, when you think about financial data collection, I know you've been doing this for a number of years. You've pretty much made it your career. Just from the 30,000-foot view, what are the most important considerations that come to mind when it comes to the transition structure data?
Well, I think that you have to have a clear vision with respect to two things. One is, why do you want to collect the data? And what data you're going to collect? And the second is, how do you assure that the standard that you set for the data you collect supports the purpose for which you're collecting the data? And this is really critical. The Dodd-Frank Act in Title VII mandated the moving of swaps to clearinghouses and reporting trades to swaps data repositories. And a year and a half ago, the Commodities Future Trading Commission held a hearing in which all of their senior staff reported that the swaps data repositories were created on time. Millions of bits of information were reported to the data repositories, but they couldn't do anything with the data. They couldn't analyze it. And they couldn't analyze it because the data was all over the place. There wasn't a clearly developed standard that would enable it. And so, just asking for data without a clear understanding of what you're going to do with it and making sure that the data comes in a standard that enables you to do what you want to do with it. I think are the two most important questions that have to be asked with respect to any effort to improve the collection of data and reduce the cost and improve the efficiency.
I appreciate that. I think that it highlights the point that, and I don't think anybody will disagree with the notion that we've begun the transition. Things have definitely started. When we look at, I was just talking before the lecture about call reports. That was a really big step forward, perhaps one of the first steps toward modernizing toward a structured data format, and that's obviously at the FDIC, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. We have the SEC that's using XBRL alongside traditional unsearchable reporting formats. But what can we do to establish buy-in at the regulators? Mr. Issa likes to say that many times the only reason that government agencies don't change is the force of momentum. It's simply the fact that they're moving forward, and it's difficult to steer a bureaucratic agency. What can we do to build some buy-in on that end? Usually accountants and lawyers, to be quite honest. And then, Matt, if you could follow up with some examples in other types of regulation where this kind of data could be beneficial. I'd love to just let you guys run with that question.
That's really a great question because nothing happens in this town if you can't get buy-in from the interested parties. And I want to take 2 minutes to tell you a little bit about how we strategize the creation of what became the Office of Financial Research. The first thing we understood was if the Office of Financial Research was going to poach someone else's budget for someone else's turf, it wouldn't get off the ground. It would be viewed as a threat to the existing agency and it would get in the way of getting buy-in. That was one consideration. A second consideration was there had to be a value proposition for everybody involved. In the case of the regulated industry, our view was that the data transformation that the OFAR was supposed to be leading would provide tremendous benefits to the financial world in the form of lower operating expenses and reduced regulatory burden and an infrastructure that would support better risk management. When we went out sort of talking to different folks who were out of town about what this effort was, one of the people we met with was the chairman of the SEC, and we sort of laid out what we were proposing. And we explained that this was a non-appropriated funds agency, and it was non-appropriated for a very specific reason. We viewed the major beneficiaries of the operations of the OFR with respect to standardization of data. The major beneficiaries would be the financial world, financial firms. And we didn't think it was appropriate for the taxpayers to be subsidizing an industry that had gotten a massive bailout from the taxpayers even further. This was something they were going to benefit from, and therefore the taxpayers shouldn't pay for it. And so the OFR doesn't go through the appropriations process. It gets its funds from the large firms who are going to be the major beneficiaries. And so I sat there and explained all this to the chairman of the SEC, who was struggling with severe budget limitations. And she was having trouble instituting computer reforms because the budget wasn't there. And she had a host of demands on her table of things that the SEC had to do. And I could see the wheels turning. And she said, if I can shift some of my computer costs to this agency, which is going to be building, or was envisioned to build a high-performance computing center, well, I can shift some of my limited resources doing something else that they're not going to do. So you have to be able to make a value proposition clear to everyone. If it's going to create disruption, if it's going to impose transition costs, etc., you have to be able to make the case that down the road, the regulatory agency is going to be much better off. Can I make a comment about the call reports that you referenced?
We're here for your opinion.
Yeah, no, I was the chairman of a regulatory agency, and I came to that really. I had some financial world background, I had a PhD in economics, but I didn't come out of the supervisory world. So, I came without the usual mindset that supervisors have. And it took me a while to understand what the examiners were doing. And I sat down with the examiners and I said, look, and this was well before the crisis, I said, look, I can understand what you do with on-site supervision. You go in, you spend 6 weeks in the bank that you're reporting on, you come back, you spend 6 weeks, you write a report, you give it to the board asks you some questions, you go away and go back a year later to the same bank. I said, it seems to me that there are some things which I understand you can only do with on-site supervision. For example, you want to check and make sure that the bank's policies and procedures conform to law and regulation. You want to make sure that the bank staff is trained in these policies and procedures. You want to make sure that they are implemented faithfully. You want to check files and make sure that they're complete. I said, but when it comes to understanding financial risk, shouldn't we be collecting the right data remotely and analyzing it on an ongoing basis? I mean, if you go a year between examinations, that's an eternity when it comes to financial risk. In fact, Jim Lockhart, the head of OFEA, in the middle of July 2008, issued a report that said the GSEs, Fannie and Freddie, were well capitalized. And 6 weeks later, they were put into conservatorship because they were considered to be insolvent. That was 6 weeks. And so I said, shouldn't we be collecting this data in the right form and analyzing it on an ongoing basis? The response to that, well, we get the call reports. I said, okay, let's talk about the call reports. I said, you get them, in our case, we got them monthly, not quarterly. We got them monthly. And I said, then they represent the condition of the bank on a certain date. You spend a number of weeks and months cleaning it, reconciling, updating it, fixing it, improving it, and it's ready to be analyzed when it's 3 months old. 3 months is an eternity when it comes to financial risk. I said, secondly, what do you get in the call report? You get accounting data. Accounting data is not risk metric, it's backwards looking, it provides you no insight to do forward-looking analysis. And, so that you got to be careful. You can automate and make machine readable all sorts of data, but if it's the wrong data for the task, you don't get the benefit out of it that you should.
Sort of to speak to that in your question about sort of where in what other regulatory areas has sort of strides been made in opening data and using data. I try not to make a habit of praising the Federal Election Commission, but recently they've actually sort of upgraded their API and come out with a new API, and I think a big part of that is they understand the users of their data really well, and they worked really well with the people that tapped into that data regularly and wanted to make use of it, and they made some upgrades and changes that were really useful and sort of moved their data systems into sort of the modern age. And that's at a regulatory agency that has a lot of trouble getting on the same page about a lot of things, but they could all get on the same page about sort of what's the use of the information that they hold, who wants it, why do they want it, and sort of move forward with that. So I think that it just speaks to Allan's point about, if you're not asking the right questions, it doesn't matter how good the data looks if it's the wrong data. And I think just to go back briefly to sort of the original point about how do you get buy-in, I think things that I've seen is if you make the change the easiest question, or perhaps the only question or the only option, I think that sort of forces buy-in. I think at the SEC, the issues that have come up with XBRL, sort of you have two parallel systems and you're not forcing a change, and that sort of makes people more likely to stick with what they know and stick with the older system. And then I think also a big thing, we've seen this with the Data Act, and I think it seems like it's been relatively successful on implementation, in part because there has still been great political interest, so Congress still cares about it. They're holding hearings, they're asking questions, and that political sort of will has kept the executive side from sort of fading. They still are engaged and interested in the questions. So I think if you can create some political will for a change like this, that can help push things forward.
If I could just jump in on that. I mean, I think part of this is also, the nature of federal agencies. I mean, nobody wants to often do an IT project because it's risky. There's some risk that they'll do something wrong. I mean, the general, mentality of a lot of agencies, of course, not to characterize everyone. They don't want to be the one that's signaled for doing something, basically doing anything wrong. And so, part of our goal is to really change what the status quo is, so that it's not just they're doing something good if they're investing in this, but they're doing something wrong if they're not investing in this. And I think when we really, get to that point, we are getting to that point in many industries, where if we're not really doing data right, there's something wrong here. And so we need to get to that point with many of these regulatory agencies where they feel compelled to do it because they recognize by not doing it, they're actually, revealing their own shortcomings.
Look, transitions are difficult. If an agency has something and it works, they're going to be very reluctant to upend what works for the promise of something that may work better. And so you really have to think through, how do you make these changes in the least disruptive way possible? Take the question of the LEI. You mentioned the DUNS numbers, and the Federal Reserve has its own way of identifying banks, and you go on and on and on. And if you suddenly turn to all the agencies and say, okay, on a date certain, everybody has to use the LEI, you probably get revolt on the part of all the parties who have applied to it. But if you issue a requirement that, for example, all of the proprietary reference databases used by all the federal agencies would be mapped to the LEI by a date certain, you have basically what is a simple computerized mapping process, which doesn't disrupt ongoing work, ongoing situations. Once you have the mapping, you can do the analysis of counterparties using the LEI because the mapping is in place. And at some point, the agencies are going to say, this is silly. Why are we maintaining two different systems? The LEI is working, why don't we just convert over? And so you really have to think through transitions.
I think that's, I'd like to continue on that point, but first, I want to remind everybody, we might be talking about a structured format here, but let's make this conversation just a little bit less structured. If you guys have any questions, please feel free, just raise your hand.
Yeah, I mean, along these lines, I'm Charlie Clark, Government Executive. Is there a feeling at the agencies, particularly SEC, that it's an unfunded mandate and they don't have time? And does the SEC, are they excited about the Financial Transparency Act? Are they threatened by it?
So if I could just quickly clarify, the Financial Transparency Act, or HR 2477, is a bill Congressman Issa introduced earlier this year. We now have 28 co-sponsors. The breadth of our co-sponsors sort of illustrates the regional and sort of issue-specific interest that you can find in this kind of transition. So I encourage you to take a look at that. But it essentially has a two-part mandate. Number one would be each individual regulator is urged toward adopting structured data formats for all the information they collect, and to make that information whenever it's already mandated by statute to be made public, that it is disclosed in a usable, human and machine readable format. The other part of the mandate would be similar to the LEI, which is anywhere where the same information is reported by the same entity to multiple regulators, that they should use the same format, and it also has a mandate to push the LEI adoption along, which goes directly to what Allan said a moment ago, and then you as well, sir. So I believe the question. Do you mind restating the question?
Is it an unfunded mandate? Are the staffs overworked? And do you think the SEC would approve of this Financial Transparency Act?
I can't speak for the SEC, I'm sorry.
I won't speak for the SEC, but I mean, I will say when we look at the opportunity here, it's about government efficiency as well as these other opportunities to increase opportunities for investor oversight. So when we look at it, we have to look at it from that perspective as well. Certainly, the transition, period itself, I don't think there's funding in there for that. But when we're looking at the big opportunity for government, this is about streamlining the government agency, and that has to be a key part of it. And that's really been one of the challenges with a lot of government IT programs is, we don't recognize always when we're investing in, government efficiency, but this is a clear example of that.
In the back?
Yeah,
Do you mind stating your name and affiliation, please?
Yeah, my name is Ren Mohan, and I'm a vendor. Having said that, I'm also very interested in this whole area, data standardization. The question I have is, standardization is good, but to what level of granularity do we want to take this standardization to? In other words, if we standardize or get it too granular, then we are cutting into the proprietariness of every entity that we want to provide regulatory information, which means they are all eventually going to look alike. So what level of granularity are we looking for? And to what extent a definition is important versus the very granular data?
Allan, you look like you're having.
Yeah, look, I would disagree with your assumption that if you get too granular, it cuts into what vendors do. I think it's just the opposite. If you look at financial instruments, when it comes to sort of the standard and representation, there are some things associated with financial contracts that are deterministic, and there are some things that are stochastic. The deterministic things are the terms of the contract that lay out what cash flow obligations are, what the start date is, if it's a loan, when principal is exchanged, what determines the interest rate, all these other things. Those are sort of like the black letter obligations of the contract. But to analyze the contract, you need to have a view of the stochastic things. And the stochastic things, when you're looking forward, are never knowable. So they can't be standardized. So that in the case of granular transaction and position data, what you're talking about standardizing are the terms, so everybody understands what an initial exchange date is, what a day count method is, what day count method is used, what determines what the reference rate is for the interest rate. But once you move beyond that to the stochastic, you can't standardize it. It's like when we were working on the OFAR legislation, somebody said to me, well, shouldn't we standardize the risk models? And I said, yeah. not? If you want to ensure that the next financial crisis is caused by a model risk. And so the answer is no business ever got a competitive advantage out of something that comes out of a reference database. You know, right now the risk modeling firms have to come up inside their black boxes with some way of describing individual contracts, cash flow generators, et cetera. They model the stochastic stuff, and then they spit out an answer. And you don't know where the answer comes from. How much of the answer is caused by how the stochastic things are modeled, how much of the answer is caused by shortcuts taken in modeling the deterministic parts of it. So the answer is the reference database becomes something that is not a competitive advantage, it becomes a public good, it's something all the vendors can use, and when you have it at the individual contract level, you then create the infrastructure for the risk modeling firms to compete on how well they model the stochastic things, which you can't standardize.
Hey, Tom Carpenter here representing Workiva, one of the leaders in the data transparency industry. Question for you, you talked at the very beginning about the savings from regulated entities, especially large firms. And yet, this is not a sexy topic. It's not something you immediately look to impact your bottom line. I think especially when you take structured data and standard set it aside, it makes all the sense, all the analogies work. You used nuts and bolts, I've heard train tracks and everything else. But then when you put this through a government process, it might not look quite as sexy or quite as efficient or beneficial. So I guess the key question is, how do you communicate to regulated entities the value that is inherently in a standardization of data? What do they pay attention to, and how do you begin to move this along? Because I think, as you said earlier, if you don't have buy-in, whether from the regulators or the regulated entities, that's really the stopping point.
It is a challenge. Talk to anybody in a financial firm who's responsible for the IT infrastructure or for data. There are two problems. Number one is people who know finance don't know anything about data. And I'm speaking as an economist, okay? Economists of all the social sciences know nothing about data. And the reason why is that they're the privileged social science. They get all the data they use, well, not all, but most of it, handed to them on a silver platter by the Census Bureau, the Bureau of Economic Analysis, the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Economists have been spoiled with a plethora of data from government agencies, and so they don't, you don't spend a lot of time in graduate school learning about data. So that's one problem. Secondly, if you talk to people in the financial world who deal with data, they typically don't know anything about finance. And one problem is this inability to communicate. I talked to a senior guy, I don't want to say which agency, but a senior guy responsible for data at an agency. And I briefed him on what we're doing with our algorithmic data standard that supports forward-looking analysis. And after an hour and a half, he looked at me and said, "Can I ask a question?" And I said, "Sure." And he said, "What's expected state contingent cash flow?" And I'm sitting thinking, oh boy. I mean, talk about a failure to communicate. That's problem number one. Problem number two is if you talk to anybody in the financial world who is responsible for data, infrastructure, computer systems, every year you got to go up to the leadership of the organization and justify your budget. And the traders go up. And they get a lot of money for the firm. They make big bonuses, they make big profits for the firm, etc. So they get their allocation based on how much money they earn. When the data guys go up, they say, "What are you going to contribute to the bottom line?" And they say, "Well, we're overhead. We're important, but we're overhead." And then the management says, "Did we have a major problem this past year?" "No, we squeaked by." And they sit there and they think, "You know what? Let's get by another year." It is a very tough sell. You know, it's like, I found, you know, a few people in the financial world who really were very farsighted and really understood it. And there was one, you know, somebody from the executive committee of one of the financial firms who supported the committee to establish the National Institute of Finance, which became OFAR. And I said to him, I said, look, what we're doing is going to create great transparency in the market. I said, your traders make money trading opaque products. So why are you interested in supporting us? I want to understand this. And he said to me, he said, you know, he said, there was dissonance between the interests of the traders and the interests of the firm. The traders make their money trading opaque products. From my perspective, and he was phenomenally enlightened, I don't think he's representative of the industry as a whole, but, you know, he said, from my perspective, I think the firm is better off making their profits off of a larger number of good trades in a transparent market than on a smaller number of bad trades in an opaque market. And so we're butting up against a culture in an industry that defies what economists think are necessary to make markets efficient, which is perfect information. So we got that problem to deal with. So it's a challenge, but at the end of the day, I think the industry is better off, investors are better off, regulatory agents, everyone's better off with access to this. It's a sell that you have to repeatedly make, and you have a clear idea of what the benefits, and you have to have a clear idea of what the value proposition is for the people you sell it to.
And just continuing in that same vein, as far as the benefits for the regulated entities, let's talk about capital formation. If you were to Google Microsoft or Procter & Gamble or even Google, you're going to come up with their financial information, their 10Ks, their 10Qs, many of these forms which were reported by these large firms in an unsearchable format such as a PDF. You're going to find them sliced and diced a million different ways because you have the benefit of popularity on your side. You have very large firms, everyone's interested, so every company out there has digitized that information, and you can basically have it aggregated, disaggregated a million different ways. But what about the new firm? What about the company that just released an IPO? We've heard some discussion over the costs of implementing a structured data regime on on the side of the regulated entity. And I think estimates go from anywhere from $5,000 to $20,000 a year. And Mr. Issa is pretty quick to scoff at that amount, having taken a company through an IPO himself. But if you look at what the benefit could be for that smaller firm, who doesn't typically have its financial numbers sliced and diced a million different ways like the bigger guys do, this information would be immediately available to anyone who wanted to have some really solid transparency into a company. You see a decrease in the risk premium associated with the security. I mean, you have instant access to more capital. You have more investor confidence. I mean, the benefits absolutely abound. We're getting close to a hard stop on our time here. So I just wanted to remind everyone of the Data Act of 2014, which was Mr. Issa's first move in the direction of moving toward structured data and data transparency in the federal government. And it did for government spending, basically what we want to do with the Financial Transparency Act in the financial regulatory atmosphere. So if there are no final questions, we will move toward wrap up. I'd like to thank our panelists again. And just as a quick reminder, we have Dr. Allan Mendelowitz, we have Mr. Daniel Castor, and Mr. Matt Rumsey. Thanks.